Welcome back to the Infinite Rabbit Hole podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today we're going to dive into part 3 of our Hollow Earth coverage, 1 week before our 4-year anniversary as the Infinite Rabbit Hole podcast. It is my pleasure to introduce you to my co-host, Jake. What's going on, dude?
Sorry, I was muted. Nothing much. Me and Whitney's 8th anniversary is on Tuesday, so we celebrated by I smoked some really nice big tomahawk steaks, and she did some fried potatoes, and we went out to see Twisters today. Kind of do a early, kind of date thing for our anniversary, and so that was pretty cool. And then a big old bear, when we were watching a movie at home while the food was cooking, decided to destroy our bird feeder, so that was cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Time for some bear stew.
Bear stew, some trichinosis.
Oh yeah, you gotta cook that thing all the way through.
Oh, you don't want the parasites?
No,
They're with you for forever.
forever, forever and ever. Cool. Yeah, man. Thanks for having us over last night, man. That was good stuff.
Yeah, let's see. What do we do? I did bacon wrapped jalapeno poppers.
Yeah.
Jeremy brought over some brats because they got a half a pig recently, so they brought over some brats from that pig, and then some pork steaks. They're like cut from the butt, not to be confused with ham steaks. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't the hugest fan of them because it was like the pork chop flavor with a steak consistency. It was just kind of throwing me off.
Oh, I love it.
They're real fatty, but either way, it was nice to have them over, and Whitney made some homemade guacamole, and we did some potato salad and stuff, and just kind of hung out with them and the kids. And then I ended up going back to Jeremy's place and with my quad and giving or my ATV and giving the kids rides on it. So that was fun.
Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah. Sorry. Trying to make sure that this live video goes up. I think I screwed it up again. I don't know what we're doing around here. Anyways, moving on to my other co-host, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, what's going on, man? How was your weekend?
Weekend was boring, pretty much. Didn't do shit this weekend. Spent a lot of time sitting around. Yeah, there's a hurricane now rolling through at this moment. But no, yesterday just was lazy day, and then woke up today, and the wind was already picked up, and it was kind of shitty out from this hurricane, and we were like, well, lazy weekend, fuck it. We went to the flea market. We did go to the flea market today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Picked up a cool knife.
Patch.
Yeah, I did find a CB patch, and then I also picked up a knife, as you do, as is the customary tradition when going to the flea market. Of course,
I think it's the law.
It's the law.
Yeah.
You have to get a knife if you go to the flea market. Yeah.
Fairly standard.
So,
yep, live is screwed up again. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So if anybody was trying to watch it and now you're listening to it and you're like, yeah, that was all screwed up.
Boo this man. Boo.
It was. That's exactly what he said during the presentation too. He said, "Boo this man."
That needs to be a fucking shirt, dude.
Good stuff. Anyways, we are here. We are here to talk about Hollow Earth. That is it. We are here to talk Hollow Earth. You guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get into the exploration side of the Hollow Earth. We're going to start right off with Admiral Byrd. Good to go, guys?
Good to go.
All right.
Good to go.
The Byrd expeditions. Quote, I'd like to see that land beyond the pole. That area beyond the pole is the center of the great unknown. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd. When someone speaks of Hollow Earth, one of the very first names that comes to mind is that of Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Everyone seems to be very well aware that he had supposedly flown over the South Pole in Antarctica and discovered a massive hole leading to a completely subterranean world that was previously unknown to mankind. But the truth is that Byrd actually flew over both the South and North Poles during two separate expeditions. The 1,700-mile flight he took into the area within the North Pole resulted in similar descriptions to his 2,300-mile expedition into a similar area at the South. In an interview following his first expedition, Byrd was quoted as calling this mission, quote, the most important expedition in the history of the world. What he described on his northern flight was not that of more ice and frigid temperatures, but rather land consisting of forests, mountains, lakes, rivers, lush vegetation, and even strange animals previously undocumented, which resembled that of the extinct woolly mammoth. This new land was accessed by way of an enormous cavity that Byrd had entered, which revealed a world not of convexity, like that of the crust of the earth, but rather a concave landscape following the inner curves of the planet we call home. The expeditions took place in 1947 and 1956 and encompassed travel equaling 4,000 miles of pure aerial discovery of an existence never seen on any map ever created by man. The January 13th, 1956 expedition, led by Byrd, highlighted a trek into the unknown area in the Antarctic, which was announced as successful by way of radio communication by a Rear Admiral George Dufek of the United States Navy Air Unit. Quote, once again, we have penetrated an unknown and mysterious land which does not appear on today's maps. The base in which the flight took off from was at McMurdo Sound, just 400 miles from the proposed South Pole. Byrd unfortunately passed away at his home in New York the following year, so the continued prodding into his mind about his apparent discoveries never really took place. So why did the government never come forward with the discoveries made by Byrd and his team? Well, there are plenty of reasons to speculate when it comes to this. One of the most common and accepted answers is that the US government saw this as an opportunity to have access to additional land to claim for the US. This would lead to an abundance of natural resources, some possibly even new. And if word would get out about the discovery made, it would lead to other countries pushing forward into their own encroachment of the New World. There was no telling how large these areas actually were because Byrd's team never reached the other side of either cavity and had to turn back due to fuel reserves. The initial description of the enormous state of these new lands were compared to that of the US in size. The US being 2,800 miles wide at its greatest width would have been the best comparison that they would have had at the time. But even on the Antarctic trip, which saw a total of 2,300 miles over the which saw a total of 2,300 miles over the cavity, the expedition never saw the other side to confirm the exact scale of their discovery. For comparison, the distance from Utqiagvik, Alaska, the most northern town in the state, to Hammerfest, Norway, the most northern town in that country, is 2,600 miles, an area that is smaller than the width of the United States. And that represents a straight line that would pass directly through the Arctic, not including the position that would have not including the position that they would have taken off from, which would have been a ship or base on the coast of the Arctic region. The reason that this is significant is that he had reached the area that was supposed to be the North Pole after only 200 miles into the flight. The rest of the 1,500 miles were over not more ice, not more sea, but rather Byrd and his crew described seeing forest and everything that comes with them hundreds of miles beyond the timberline. Side note, the timberline is an area of the planet that trees stop growing due to harsh, frigid climates. This can also be seen on a smaller scale on mountains within snowcaps. Another huge question that is asked when it comes to Admiral Byrd's claims is, of course, whether or not we can accept it as truth. Well, there are a few things to know. One, there were a handful of press releases that were distributed during the time of this discovery that documented interviews with Byrd himself. Two, the first expedition, which took place in 1947 in the Antarctic, is famously known as Operation High Jump, led by Byrd, by the way, and was officially described as the U.S.'s establishment of the Little America 4 military base, which for some reason needed 4,700 men, 13 naval ships, and 33 aircraft. Three, High Jump was followed by Operation Deep Freeze in 1956, also led by Byrd, which was the title used for the excuse to have a constant U.S. military presence in the Antarctic region at all times. So I personally want to know why, if Rear Admiral Byrd was very vocal about his discovery in the Arctic in 1947, was he allowed to stay in service and also be given the important role of leader and coordinator of mirrored expeditions in the same year to Antarctica, not once, but twice, 9 years apart? Then why did he suddenly die the year after the deep freeze operation? And why was Antarctica such a hot zone for research by almost every first world nation on Earth, immediately after which eventually led to the famed Antarctic Treaty signed in 1958, which eliminated the use of military operations within the region under the guise of quote-unquote scientific research? All of this is Googleable, by the way. You do not need to look far for this very public information. All right, so we got a brief introduction to the concept or the story behind the Admiral Byrd expedition. There was a total of 3 flights, 2 of them in 1947, one to the north, one to the south, and then one in 1956, which was strictly to the south. The 2 in the south, Operation High Jump and Operation Deep Freeze. The Deep Freeze, we had the famed Antarctic Treaty. What do you guys think?
Flying.
Ooh, good question. I don't know. That is a good question, though. I'm going to try Googling that.
The way it sounds is that they flew into the hollow earth, which means it must have been rather large, the cavern, to get in there, if they flew into it.
So, yes, the cavern is huge. The Symes hole, if you will, is ginormous.
If you remember, like I think on the last episode we talked about it. If it's like the 2 big openings on the North and South Pole, they'd be so big that you wouldn't even see them. Like if you were standing at, it wouldn't even be an edge, right? It's not like
it just looked like a cliff.
Not even. It's just, it'd be such a long, gradual slope, just like the rest of the globe is, right? That you just wouldn't even realize it. Like it's not affecting your horizon standing 6 feet off the ground, or even flying a couple hundred feet above the ground, you know?
They're called R4Ds. It's a transport aircraft. And it was developed by Douglas Airliner.
R4Ds?
R4D8. R4D Tech 8. This is just Wikipedia here real quick. The Douglas R4D Tech 8 is a military transport aircraft developed from the civilian Douglas DC-3S airliner. It was used by the United States Navy and United States Marine Corps during the Korean War and Vietnam. But here it says that the first flight was in June 23rd of 1949, but high jump took place in 47.
See, I wonder... This is why, like, flat earthers will use Admiral Byrd a lot too, you know, because you know, he didn't say that he flew into anything, you know, he just was flying over the land and the ecosystem changed, you know, and he was like, what the fuck? So was it that he was flying into a giant cavern or into this massive opening that he couldn't, you know, tell because it was so big, or was he flying over the ice wall and finding more land, undiscovered land.
Well, in the next bit, we're gonna dive into his diary, which is it's a time-stamped, chronologically listed diary, and I have major red flags about this thing. I have a copy of it. Apparently there's many different publications or publishing agencies that have put it out. Apparently it's all the same diary. But it really reads as I think I call it fan fiction in this next section, and I think that's going to answer your question. I don't want to get too far into it just because I'm literally about to read it. But just the way it's set up, you guys you'll hear it. I mean, I didn't copy it down word for word, obviously, but I got the story out of it from a very, very chronologically listed set of events that were just very specific to. I mean, unless he had the flight logs, which he very well could have, getting these timestamps for these specific points in the expedition, I just don't see it being a thing.
Where did they... So I'm looking back in your report. It says, but even on the Antarctic trip, which saw a total of 2,300 miles over the cavity, the expedition never saw the other side to confirm the exact scale of their discovery. So according to Pima Air and Space Museum, the Douglas RD-4 TAC-8 has a maximum range of 2,500 miles. So how were they able to go 2,300 miles across this cavity and back without aerial refueling?
The 23 might have been including going there and coming back. I want to say in the diary they do talk about running low on fuel. It
would have been not just low on fuel; they would have crashed and died.
No, right.
Yeah,
Right. Obviously, if they had done the 23 going one way, but let's say they did 1,150 going one way, and then the other 1,150 coming back the other way, that would equal 2,300 total miles being flown. I think that's pretty much what they were talking about. I don't think it was a 2,300 into. I think it was a 2,300 total, but I don't know. I don't know for sure.
There's holes. We're punching holes in it already.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. The Admiral Byrd expedition is definitely strange. There might be an episode if I can get a hold of some better material, some better material, something that dives into it a little bit deeper and more thoroughly. I might dedicate an episode to it later on down the road. But for right now, I'm skimming over it, and I'm just basically summarizing the diary for you guys here in the next section. And that's, yeah,
Is it
I don't know.
confirmed that Operation Deep Freeze and what's the other one?
High jump.
High jump are real?
Yes. Well, so Jeff, I don't know if you heard what he asked. I know you stepped away there for a second. You're on mute, by the way. But he asked if deep freeze and high jump are real.
I'm pretty sure. I think so.
Well, I just thought since you're kind of like the conspiracy dude, I thought you'd be more familiar with at least high jump. High jump is a very
I'm definitely familiar with Operation High Jump. And yeah, that's real. I'm thinking more deep freeze. I don't know if that's real. It's hard to know what's real, right? Like a lot of this shit could be fake. Even the stuff that we might think is real could be fake. It could be misinformation or psyops, right? So,
because it kind of blows my mind that there'd be 4,700 men, 13 naval ships, 33 aircraft involved in these operations.
Mm-hmm.
But for one, we only have the resources from Admiral Byrd, no one else. And
Well,
also, why would the military invest such a large amount into discovering ice?
so deep freeze was the implementation of the Navy base that they created on there, the Little America 4, I believe it is. Um, that was the reason for deep
Okay.
freeze, the quote unquote bunny ears reason for deep freeze. But yet, Admiral Byrd also took a flight into the inner Earth during Operation Deep Freeze. You can
Right.
Google Operation Deep Freeze. You can Google Operation High Jump. Yes, they're both real. They happened.
Hmm.
Is it what they say it is?
Well, no.
That's the question, right?
Right.
Um, they
You
actually
think?
happened. There's documentation. I mean, it gets as legit as anything else when you see it on Wikipedia. Obviously, it's real. You know.
Well, Wikipedia only has real things.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Hmm.
Um, but
Okay.
I guess the real question is, did Admiral Byrd really go on those flights?
Right.
You
It
guys
still
ready to
kind of
jump into
tripped
that?
me up. We talked about this a long, long time ago, probably in our
Hmm.
flat Earth episodes or something like that. But it's like, why would an admiral be flying?
Yes.
You
Good
know?
point. Good point. Um,
Well,
the
this was the
only
50s, right? So I mean, times have
nah,
changed, right?
nope, not. Yeah, I believe it. Even back then, I don't think that was a thing. In fact, I would even say that back then it would be less likely that an admiral, because they were so prestigious. I mean, they're still prestigious, right?
Or do we just
Uh,
refer to him as admiral now? Was he not an admiral then? But that was his
mm,
final rank, so we just
Captain
call him
Bird.
Admiral Byrd. Yeah.
that's a good fucking question. I like that question. Let's see. What rank was Admiral Richard Byrd
Right, because I don't call my
in
stepdad,
Operation High Jump?
Private Walker. I call him Lieutenant Colonel. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what
Yeah.
his last rank was before he retired.
I've
Yeah.
just
You call
seen.
him that instead of
I'm just
dad.
seeing. I'm seeing
Lieutenant Colonel?
Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd. That's it.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm ready to move on.
Uh, oh no, it looks like he might have been a lieutenant commander at the time.
Oh, well, then that makes more sense.
Yep, that's '04, right?
I've seen full bird captains flying. I have
Mm-hmm.
never once seen an admiral being like, well, I used to be a pilot back in the day. Let's go flying, you know?
Let's go take this baby out. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it looks like high jump. He was a lieutenant commander, which was 47, and then was it 56? Was deep freeze. So that would have been 9 years later. He could have made rear admiral by then.
You think?
9 years. I mean, he would have had a decent amount of time already in. I know admirals are usually like those 30-year guys. I don't know. I mean, but he was a rear admiral. That's true.
Yeah.
Like if you look up, Richard Evelyn Byrd, he was a rear admiral. So
Hmm.
I don't know. But this is also only one source saying that he was a lieutenant commander. So I don't know.
Hmm.
Then there's this one. This is the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. It says Lieutenant, later Admiral Richard E. Byrd. So
Hmm.
maybe he was a lieutenant, which is a '03.
But even still, I don't see. Okay, so we've solved the flying thing. Why is he flying? I don't see the U.S. because we worked with lieutenants all the time. Those were and lieutenant
Mm-hmm.
commanders and commanders. Those were the folks flying our 60s.
Yep.
They all followed orders. I couldn't see a single one of them being like, I want to plan an expedition. And
Yep.
then the Navy being like, yeah, of course. You're
Well,
a lieutenant. We definitely were going to give you all the funds to explore the Arctic on the military's dime.
yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man. But I think if he was a lieutenant or lieutenant commander at the time, which I'm seeing a ton of sources just calling him rear admiral.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm not 100% sure about the lieutenant commander thing. But
That's
even
not a big
if,
trip up for me, man, because I think times change, brother. I
well,
think back in the 40s and the 50s, they were still trying to figure a lot of the stuff out. So they might be willing to take some gambles on some lower ranked guys. Be like, yeah, we need an expedition out there. We only have so many ships and so much shit going on. So yeah, do it. Let's go.
well, it's kind of the point I was getting to was if they were going to send a lieutenant or lieutenant commander out there, that means the U.S. already knew about it. They already knew that the Earth was hollow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were literally stinging an expedition under the guise of high jump or deep freeze, using Admiral Byrd for or Lieutenant Commander Byrd at the time as their pilot that day. They had him, and then they had a communications officer on board as well. Um, and then here comes deep freeze 9 years later. Why not send the same guy that we already have under hush orders? That's kind of where my
But
thought
then they
process was.
allowed his diary to get out.
So yeah, that again, I don't want to dive in. Like we're literally
All
about to
right,
talk
all right.
about
We'll
this,
move
but
on.
he ends up being like quarantined afterwards, and then set free after saying that he'd been to the hollow of the earth. But then,
Mhm.
like, he was able to continue service. I don't think that would happen. I think that if they discovered the hollow earth and Admiral Byrd came out and was like, "Yeah, it's the hollow of the earth," they're gonna lock him up because they're, you know, to the public he's crazy, whether or
Right.
not they actually knew about it or not. And they're gonna strip rank,
Mm-hmm.
just because you're letting go of government secrets, and
Shoot, back in those
possibly
days, they would have tried him as like for
all kinds of
espionage
shit.
or
Ab-
freaking,
absolutely,
being a traitor and hung him.
absolutely. I think the simple fact that he was able to stay in the military after coming forward about seeing the Hollow Earth and being in the Hollow Earth, the story's false. That's just my personal thoughts on the Admiral Byrd thing.
We'll get into the next section because I'm about to, yeah, just I don't want to fuck it up.
Ooh, you about to Jeff this shit?
He's about to Jeff it all up.
All right, you guys ready?
Yep.
Admiral Byrd's diary. Admiral Richard E. Byrd was born on October 25th, 1888, in Winchester, Virginia. On May 28th, 1908, Byrd was appointed as a midshipman in the United States Navy and graduated from the Naval Academy in July of 1912. Admiral Byrd did many great things while he was in the Navy, and he would have had in sorry, and he would have had to in order to earn the rank of Rear Admiral. But the first thing we should mention in regard to this subject is the expedition he and Chief Aviation Pilot Floyd Bennett embarked on in order to attempt to fly over the North Pole in 1926. This incredible feat would eventually have both Byrd and Bennett awarded the Tiffany Cross Medal of Honor by President Calvin Coolidge. This flight would later fall into scrutiny as it was founded in 1996 that a diary was discovered of Byrd's that didn't directly say that the flight was unsuccessful, but certainly implied it. This also could not have been true if the three flights between 1947 and 1956 really yielded the discovery of the Hollow Earth. Now, before we actually embark in this incredible journey, I feel the need to insert some tidbits about a few things. First off, I would like to talk about a second diary that was discovered of Admiral Byrd's. This diary has been created into a book for public consumption and can be bought now in any online bookstore. I got my copy off of Amazon. The title of this book is The Missing Diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, A Secret Expedition and Journey to a Paradise Inside the Earth. The authors are listed as Admiral Byrd himself and a Timothy G. Beckley. Now, I don't know too much about Mr. Beckley, but I can say that for $20, this book is an incredible disappointment, as the book is about the size of a regular spiral notebook and has all about 20 words on every other page, but the pages in between the worded pages have incredible photographs, diagrams, and illustrations. And honestly, if you wanted a book with pictures from Byrd's trips and career, this would be a great price for these amazing pictures. But the book itself has about a hair over 1,000 words in total and is written like a fan fiction. I personally do not put a lot of weight into this book, but after listening to a few other shows' adaptations of the Admiral Byrd story, it is clear that many do take this extremely seriously and report on it as so. So that is what we are about to do right now. Again, I wanted to put this out as a sort of disclaimer to make all those aware that this specific source does not seem credible to me. But I do want to also say that this is in no way, shape, or form sways me away from the belief that Admiral Byrd did see something extraordinary on these flights. But without further ado, here is the Admiral Byrd story of his discovery of the world inside of the Earth, as told by his quote-unquote missing diary, which reads as if it were a flight log. The expedition began at 0610 on the morning of February 19th, 1947, from what he only refers to as Base Camp Arctic. At 9:10, Admiral Byrd radios into base that he is seeing an array of different colors speckled on the snowy landscape. He describes a generally linear pattern of the colors yellow, red, and purple from his position of about 2,000 feet in the air. During the same radio transmission, he also describes what seems to be a malfunction with both the gyro and magnetic compasses, and he continues his flight by heading only. 5 minutes later, he claims to spot what looks like mountains in the distance. At 10,000 hours, Admiral Byrd again radios into base camp that he is now on the other end of the mountains, and below he can see a valley with a stream or small river running through it. He seems unnerved due to not understanding the situation. Quote, "There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong. His navigation instruments are still spinning out of control, and just a few minutes later he calls back in to report that he had dropped elevation to 1,000 feet to get a better view of what he's referring to as a woolly mammoth." At 10:30, the Admiral claims that the radios are not functioning, and he can no longer contact base camp. The outside ambient temperature reads 74 degrees Fahrenheit, and he is surrounded by rolling green hills, when what he really should be seeing is nothing but a frozen infinity. At 11:30, things start to get even stranger as he begins his log describing what he claims to be an icy city and strange disc-shaped flying craft closing in on him. As the saucers get closer, the Admiral claims to see swastikas marked on the side of the craft and claims to no longer be able to control his plane. A few minutes later, a voice comes over the radio with a German or Nordic accent saying, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral. You are in good hands." The engines shut down, and the plane continues its flight, controlled by some unseen force as he begins to slowly descend as his landing gear makes a soft landing. The Admiral describes men approaching, who are tall and have blonde hair without any sign of weapons. A voice calls out from outside for the Admiral to open the cargo door. Admiral Byrd complies as he does not see an option. This is where the first log ends, and he began describing everything at a later time from memory alone. Admiral Byrd and his radio man are taken very calmly and politely as they and the party step onto a smooth conveyor belt, and they are transported without any effort into the city at the base of the airfield. Byrd describes the city as seeming like it was made out of crystal, as it is very shiny and extravagant. The conveyor brought them right to the front of a building that he doesn't seem to have words for to describe. And while they are in this building, They are given a warm beverage that is like nothing he has ever tasted, and he claimed it was delicious. Soon after, Byrd and his radio man are approached by a small group of men as they ask the Admiral to follow them alone. At this point, he splits with the radio man and enters what he believes is an elevator. After heading downwards for a short while, he is ushered into a room where he is, quote, to have an audience with the master. As he is admiring an absolutely beautiful setting in this room, he is welcomed by a warm and rich voice, which is coming from what Byrd describes as an older being that beckons him to have a seat at the table. Quote, we have let you enter here because you are of noble character and well known on the surface world, Admiral. You are in the domain of Ariani, the inner world of the earth. We shall not long delay your mission, and you will be safely escorted back to the surface and for a distance beyond. But now, Admiral, I shall tell you why you have been summoned here. The older being describes to Byrd that it was when the surface world had set off atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki that the underworld responded by sending up the craft they call Flugorads to investigate what had happened. He continues to explain that the civilizations in the underworld have been in contact with the leaders of the outer world, and they do not heed their warnings about atomic weapons. He explains that the science of his people is thousands of years more advanced than anything that man has on the surface. The older being continues to explain that they have attempted to contact many different lower level people on the surface in order to attempt to get their word across to the people under the control of the leaders. But their Flugorads are always being fired on. He claims that this is their final attempt to try and save humanity, and that Byrd is the one that needs to spread the word of the underworld and their wishes of peace on the surface. The older being claims that this is the beginning of the end for mankind, and he wishes to not see it end. From this point, the Admiral was ushered back up to the level where his radio man was, who we now find out whose name is Howie, and the two men from the surface stepped back onto the conveyor and was sent back to their plane. The men jumped in and were quickly lifted into the air up to about 2,500 feet and began their travel back to base camp under an unseen force. Admiral Byrd notes that the airspeed indicator is not reading any of the plane's forward momentum. After a few hours, a voice came over the radio and announced that their flight controls had been freed. The voice sounded off Wiedersehen, goodbye in German, and Admiral Byrd and his radio man watched as the two Flugelrats departed the flight group, and the two men were back to just the two of them. There is not a lot about what happened between this part of the trip and when they landed. In fact, the next meaningful thing added to the diary is when he mentions that on March 11th, 1947, he had briefed staff at the Pentagon about the trip and all of the experiences that he and Howie, the radio man, had witnessed and endured. Admiral Byrd claims to have been detained at this time and sent through multiple mental and physical health screenings before being allowed back to the fleet. And at this point in the diary, Byrd claims that he is given instructions to not speak of his discovery and is reminded that he is an active duty service member and that he must obey orders. Now, all of this information that involves Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd and his incredible journey to the inner earth lies in the belief that the diary actually exists or existed at some point. The author of a specific article in the 1959 special Hollow Earth edition of the Flying Saucers magazine by the name of Ray Palmer may have more to do with the story of Admiral Byrd's amazing expedition than the Admiral did himself. In the article, he quoted Byrd in a speech that he supposedly gave where he introduced the concept of his journey into the inner earth, to the world. But unfortunately, the readers of the magazine were keen to this and wrote to the editor for a solid source in these statements, which eventually forced Palmer to admit in a later edition of the publication that he may have taken the word of someone without checking his sources. This mystery person would eventually be revealed as F. Amadeo Giannani, the author of a book titled Worlds Beyond the Poles, which was released earlier in the same year, which discussed Byrd's southern expeditions in a sort of fantastical way, in which he describes Byrd as not going to the inner earth, but rather a land above the earth. It is the belief of many that this is the actual origin of the famed Admiral Byrd diary. But to defend the other side of the story, Byrd did, however, spend time in a mental institution after Operation High Jump. This is documented and can be fact checked. But why? Well, he did say some pretty weird things in interviews, such as being quoted as saying something about the, quote, land beyond the pole on a few different occasions. It is my belief that Byrd did know something, and that something may have been more than the U.S. military was willing to let the public know about. Was it an entrance to the Hollow Earth? Was it the true origin of the popular flying saucer phenomenon? Maybe the civilization of Atlantis, trapped under the Antarctic ice. It's hard to say, but there are for some, but there are some questions. Damn, but there are some questions about the entire story, that remain unanswered. All right, so yeah, go ahead.
Seems hokey to me, because
Yeah.
if we die, they die.
Mm-hmm.
If the ozone gets ripped open and the planet gets cooked, then they get cooked too.
They do
More
get
so, it's
cooked.
like a baked potato wrapped in tinfoil.
You know what I think, man, about
Tell
this
us what
whole
you think,
thing?
man.
I think that at the end of World War II, there was obviously, Nazis all over the world, right? Hitler was sending them all over the world, Tibet, all over, Southeast
Antarctica.
Bavarian
Asia,
village
Antarctica, South
yeah.
America. They were sending them everywhere, right? They were looking for like ancient knowledge and just all kinds of weird stuff, right? Now, one of two things. Either at the end of the war, our government, our military just knew that, hey, look, there was some factions of Nazis in Antarctica. They had set up a small base, small outpost out there. So they sent Admiral Byrd out there to go handle business. And all of the shenanigans that he's talking about, oh, I found this, I found that, that's just a psyop. I think that because some of that stuff was published then, I think it was a psyop, right? Where, they couldn't just come right out and say, hey, look, there was like this, after the war had ended, quote unquote, we were still fighting. We still lost soldiers out there, right? Like it was still a thing. So they couldn't just come out and say that. They had to make up some other, oh, it's an expedition, right?
Right.
So I think that's either what happened, or when the Nazis were out looking for information, they found what they were looking for and they went down to Antarctica and they had some high tech, whether it's the Bell, or whatever it was, they were doing some shit down there. And obviously we couldn't allow that, right? We had to go down there and spread a little freedom and, same outcome, I guess.
Superior firepower.
Right. Exactly.
It just, I don't know. I feel like I want to add a third thing to what Jeff said. During World War II, the United States was so focused on communists. There's, oh gosh, if you're in Hollywood and you're believed to be a communist, we'll put you in a concentration camp sort of stuff because we can't have any spies or anything like that. I want to say that at the end of World War II, they were so heavily focused on Nazis that if you were going to write a fan fiction about what you've done, that adding Nazis to it would just be just the added, because that's what the whole world was focused on. I mean, shoot, he was, Hitler with his war machine was trying to take over all of Europe.
Yeah. I mean, literally, like Batman and Spider-Man in their first comics were fighting Nazis.
Yeah, I mean, if you were trying to, I don't know, spin a good psyop, add that there's Nazis there when there isn't.
Yep.
I don't know how it would benefit anybody or whatever, but it just seems so weird that there's higher beings and all this sort of stuff, and we've got so much more advanced technology, but also there's swastikas on these saucers and stuff.
Yeah,
It's just a
I'll tell you what
weird
it
thing
is.
to throw in there.
It's the same thing that they are still doing now, right? It's always this you have to have a forever enemy or an invisible enemy, right?
Yeah,
To
sure.
unite the people to keep voting this fund to fund the war machine, right? Because people
Sure.
make billions off of this. So it's the same thing then as it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like this at all. Like, I don't know.
I think that the most ridiculous. Sorry, I just hit my mic. The most ridiculous thing to me is the fact that these people are apparently so much more advanced than us. But this one guy in 1956 is their last opportunity to contact the civilian, the Earthlings on the civilian, or on the civilian, the Earthlings on the surface, to tell them to change their ways. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man.
It sounds like a psyop. I'm down with Jeff.
Yeah,
with
it's definitely a
saying that,
psyop, man.
Because we know that from the Nazi diaries, and one thing I will attribute to the Nazis is that they wrote everything down.
Yeah.
Hitler wrote everything down. His top generals wrote everything down, and they did a mad dash when we were in there just whooping butt to delete all this stuff, burn it all, stuff like that. And we got so much information from them because they had logs and records beyond belief of everything that was going on. Even when it came down to the atrocities of the concentration camps, they had every single Jew that went through, all of their belongings they confiscated, all their gold teeth, all this sort of stuff, all their jewelry. They had logs and records throughout. And I don't know. It's just, so we would know where they went. We know that from other people, say, exploring the Amazon, that there's Bavarian villages in the Amazon where they're like, yeah, my grandfather was a Nazi. We have his uniform and all of his war medals and all of his blah, 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 right? They went everywhere. We know that that Hitler was looking for, all kinds of he was really deep in the occult. He was looking for all sorts of magical type things. I think they were looking for like the Holy Grail, quote unquote. They were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. They were looking for all these, artifacts that could gain them some sorts of powers and things like that. I think that this was probably a psyop to go and whoop some butt in a location that we knew of, like Jeff was just saying, and then they covered it up by saying like, oh my gosh, it was the Hollow Earth. But the problem, but then I'm going to poke a hole in that as well, because if that were the case, they would have let the public know right away that the Hollow Earth was real versus telling them that we kicked some Nazi butt in the Antarctic, which at that time would have been the biggest and best news ever. Hey, we found a Nazi outcropping here in wherever, BFN Antarctica, and we tore them up,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think that they definitely, the thing is, if they did get their hands on some higher tech, right? If the Nazi scientists, because here's the thing, right? With Operation Paperclip,
yeah,
right? And the Russians had their own version of that as well. I forget the name of it. They took all those scientists. We took a lot of those scientists, thousands of them, right?
Yeah.
And some of those scientists started NASA, right? They were the heads of our rocket programs, and
Warner von Braun, yeah.
right, yeah. And then I forget the other guy's name who was running like all the MK Ultra stuff. They were running all of our psyops, like literal, like our psychic operations and like weird, Montauk project stuff. Like those were all Nazi scientists that were coming up with and discovering and utilizing these super far out, like advanced shit,
Yeah.
So it's possible that, hey, they did get their hands on something and they were developing some super ultra tech. And, the only way that like there's, remember I said, I think last time we talked, or maybe it was a few episodes ago, the idea that Rome never fully collapsed. It just kind of like transitioned
Evolved,
into,
right?
it
Yeah,
evolved into what we call America, right? Like the same governance and the same symbols and the same type of
yeah.
shit, right? It's possible that the same thing happened with the Nazis as well. Maybe the only way for them to really escape the fate of us coming in and the Russians coming in was to be like, hey, look, show of force. We have some shit you guys will never be able to get your hands on. And they infiltrated everything. And they were like, that's how we're going to keep going, as we'll use this guise of paperclip to go in there and better humanity or whatever they're doing. Well, meanwhile, they still have their little outposts and their little black budget programs at Raytheon and whatnot that they're still running and still funding to do all these UFO and weird shit.
I know Werner von Braun. Well, I don't know it. I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and they were talking about him saying that they would take the slowest, least productive Jews and hang them outside of the factory so that the other Jews could see it and be like, well, we better, keep our weight up or else this is going to happen to us. And in that circumstance, you could call him a Nazi scientist. But in other circumstances, I wonder if they were that, if they fell into the Nazi category of belief and cleansing the world and all that sort of stuff, or if they were just scientists that were then captured by Hitler and the government and said, hey, you're either going to work for us or we're going to execute you or your family.
It's probably a mix.
Yeah.
It's probably a healthy mix. I mean, right, you got to think in any group of people there's there's good and bad people, right? And
Sure.
especially in any like big conflict like that, world war especially, like there's people who get drug into with not a whole lot of option, right? Like, and I'm not making excuses for anybody, obviously, especially Nazis, but you would imagine that there's some super intelligent geniuses,
Yeah.
right, that just happen to be German citizens at the time that were just sucked in to the war machine, and now they're developing the Nazi bell or whatever the case might be.
Like, I think Einstein was German, wasn't he?
Of course, yeah.
So if he had gotten sucked into it and stuff, and we had
Exactly.
gotten him, it'd been like, well, he's just a guy, a really, really smart guy that got sucked into the war machine.
Right.
Yeah.
But some of those guys weren't, man. Like, like the guys that were headed up, like I said, all the Montauk and the MK Ultra stuff. I mean, they were doing fucked up shit to U.S. citizens, man. Let's be real, right? They were doing unconstitutional experiments on citizens. And who are you going to get to do that kind of people? Already bad people who are already doing bad shit to other people.
Yeah.
So,
or the CIA.
Or both, right? Well, they were. That's what the CIA. I mean, some of the people who started the CIA were some of those people from Paperclip.
Yep.
Right. Now there was intelligence before that. It's not. Never mind. It gets deep, but a lot of those Paperclip guys are like the legends, in CIA.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think just overall, not a huge fan of the Admiral Byrd story.
Yeah, not really. Extra territory is definitely interesting, whether it's inside the Earth or on top of a bigger Earth or a flat Earth. The idea that there's just more land, more resources somewhere that just isn't being, explored or disclosed to us even is like, okay. Especially Antarctica.
Yeah. I think there's better evidence for the Hollow Earth than Admiral Byrd and his diary, which
it's just so weird to me that it's just this one guy. Like, where's Howie's diary?
Right? What about Howie? Howie's people too.
Jeremy, do you remember the guy's name from Philadelphia experiment?
No, not right off the top of my head. But
I don't remember if he was an admiral or not either. But there's another higher. He might have been an admiral. Philadelphia experiment, and like apparently they went through time. They went into the future on this ship, right? And he didn't say anything about Hollow Earth in the future. And I think he was alive in like 2600 or 2900, according to him.
Where is? Oh, right here, Philadelphia experiment. Yeah, that would have been part 2, right?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you.
Ed Cameron.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just weird. There's so many holes you could poke in this, and just like I said before, like Jeff's. Oh, this was a psyop. Talked about the Hollow Earth versus whooping Nazi butt, but that was the thing. We're eradicating the Nazis from the face of the earth type stuff. I mean, that would have been the go to.
Well,
And
I have.
maybe that's why the diary was covered up. I mean, shoot, if it was released so many years after his expeditions, that would have led or shine a pretty bad light on the U.S. government if we knew for a fact that there was Nazi scientists and Nazi type stuff going on in the Hollow Earth, and yet we did nothing about it at that time.
Mm, yeah.
So I don't know.
Oh, man.
I don't know. Yeah.
I do love the idea of Hollow Earth, though, man. I do love thinking. I mean, it's obvious. We've talked about this in the last episode. The giant caverns, and are there some big enough down there for
Yeah.
whether it's civilizations or even just advanced life or hiding life, right? Something that's
Yeah.
hiding. Like, it's super interesting, man. And
No, it really is. I'm way more curious about what's in the earth and what's in the oceans than what's out in space. Like,
Sure.
for sure.
I agree.
I
agree.
I would rather us spend all of our resources on exploring every square inch of the oceans to see what sort of animals are down there. I can't. It's like I use this reference a lot, especially because one of my old supervisors told me this, that that I'm a blobfish, and I was like, what? And he was like, at the depths of the ocean, under extreme pressures, this fish is like every other fish. It eats like a fish, it swims like a fish, it breathes like a fish, it does all the things like a fish. But you take all those pressures off of it and all that stress, and it turns into like a wad of chewed up bubble gum, and it's worthless, and it can't even move under its own weight. And he said, Owens, you're a blobfish. You need stress and pressure to survive. And I was just like, and it made so much sense to me. Like it completely, it queued up like, well, this is my personality, all this sort of stuff. It just made sense. But I mean, but that's amazing, right? And we see these angler fish that use lights on their little things to attract other fish into their mouths and stuff like that. I mean, I would like to see us explore every square inch of the oceans before we even spend a second looking at Mars. But that's just me. It's way more interesting if we had a hollow earth, if we had a flat earth, whatever it is, whatever the model is. I'd rather us know that to 100% certainty before we looked at Venus or Mars or the sun or whatever.
In order to not be an echo chamber, because I actually do very much agree. I think that space becomes interesting if some sort of artifact is found.
Which it won't.
I think. I mean, if we do go to Mars and we find something that somehow connects to our history, then it becomes very, very interesting. I mean, obviously, Jake, I know your stance on that, right? But I'm just saying.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm just saying. I think, I don't disagree. I think we should be spending more time here on Earth doing research here than in outer space, because I don't think that our story is out there. I think our story is right here. But once or if that is proven to be false, that there is an artifact in space, especially if it's connected to our history or to us somehow, then
I feel like you're just setting yourself up to get lied to.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Oh,
man,
I agree.
I think what's gonna happen is, I think exactly that's gonna happen. I think, first of all, there is no actual artifact in space, especially that's tied to our history. But I think they will discover one, quote unquote. They will discover a nice, beautiful artifact, perfectly intact, right? That's going to perfectly explain the missing puzzle piece of our human history, or whatever. Or it'll open up another door, another question, so that we can spend We can launder trillions more dollars,
It's good.
in
Yeah.
this thing. But yeah, that's what's gonna happen.
It's gonna be like, oh, what's this?
A
Oh, this
Nokia cell phone on the surface of Mars.
like look, it says that the reason for existence is to get shots.
Yeah, yeah, and then it says find tablet 2 for more, and you're like, oh no, we gotta up it from $65 million today to $65 billion a day.
Rough.
Raise the taxes.
That's right. 90% income tax.
No, I agree. I do. Oh, sorry. You gotta throw something else out there. You can't just have three guys saying I agree.
No, I understand. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
unless we agree.
Well, which we do.
It is interesting that there's a lot more talk about UFOs, especially from like the government and all this, like the last few years, which we've all said 100 times.
Right.
But like it is super interesting to think that something weird's going on, even if they're making it all up and they're setting us up for a fake alien invasion. I don't know, but something's happening.
Yep.
Yep.
You guys ready to move on?
Yeah, dude.
All right.
Oh, there's more? Oh shit. Okay.
I have 3 very small sections to go through.
Why don't you just burn them all out?
You want me to just burn them now? I can do that.
Yeah, go for it, dude.
All right. First section. I was going to say the hollowers. The followers. But where Admiral Byrd left off, others would continue down many different paths and possibilities, which resulted from the implications of the now referred to Hollow Earth theory. One such other was a man by the name of Ray Palmer, who was the publisher and editor of the famed Flying Saucers magazine, which held reign of the UFO information world from 1957 to 1976. Palmer built on Byrd's claims and used them to describe a possible origin of the flying saucer phenomenon. Quote, how well known is the Earth? Is there any area of the Earth that can be regarded as a possible origin of the flying saucer? There are 2. The 2 major areas of importance are the Antarctic and the Arctic. Palmer was a firm believer that UFOs did not come from extraterrestrial civilizations from some far-off place in space, but rather that they came from somewhere within the borders of our own planet. It is his belief that UFOs emerge out of their civilization's landmass by way of polar holes in the earth that gradually ascend at a rate barely noticeable to the human eye. For the better part of explanation, this would be seen as more of a continuation of the earth instead of a giant hole in the ground. The edges of these cavernous lands are not sharp and rigid, but rather smooth and continuous with a gradual change in climate, proportional to that of the Earth's surface. This would be the true origins of the world's UFO phenomenon and the home of their pilots. Bunger's Oasis. During 1947's Operation High Jump, Lieutenant Commander David Bunger, who was piloting one of the Navy's large transport planes only 4 miles inland from the area of the Shackleton ice shelf, when he and his crew discovered a chunk of land that was completely ice-free. The Oasis, which is what he was calling it, had numerous lakes that ranged in size up to 3 miles long. The Oasis was in the shape of a rough square and had sheer ice walls on 2 sides and gradual snowdrifts on the other 2, all of which seemed to lead into a landscape of infinite and desolate ice and snow. The area now known as Bunger Hills leads to proof that there is in fact warmth in an area of the world where there shouldn't be. The area in which the oasis encompasses surpasses an area that would be affected by volcanic activity or mysterious warm winds from faraway tropical regions of the planet. No, the better explanation is that the porous composition of the crust in this area would be thinner here than almost anywhere on Earth due to the proximity to the proposed South Pole and the warmth of the inner planet finding its way to the surface. Explorers. On August 3rd, 1894, the Nobel Peace Laureate Dr. Fridtjof Nansen of Norway noted a description of warm weather and an abundance of life in his journal during an expedition to areas up to and beyond the North Pole. Could he have made it past the great, massive freshwater ice pack described earlier in episode 1? Well, also in his journal, there were many entries about his compass failing and acting erratically as well. Another explorer by the name of Hayes kept a diary for his 1881 exploration of the Arctic region as well, and made one very interesting discovery while at latitude 78 and 17 minutes. Quote, I secured a yellow-winged butterfly. And who would believe it? A mosquito. And also 10 moths, 3 spiders, 2 bees, and 2 flies. At this latitude, it would be almost impossible to think that the insects gathered by Hayes came from a place south of his location. Hayes's findings were published in a book titled 3 Years of Arctic Service by Adolphus W. Greely in 1886. This was a truly good find, as his book made zero claim to anything close to regarding a hollow earth, and yet we see evidence of the mysteries people were seeing. And from 1822 to 1824, British explorer James Weddell thoroughly recorded encountering ice-free areas of a sea in the Antarctic that would eventually bear his name. The trip took him as far south as 74 degrees and 15 minutes, which broke Captain James Cook's 1774 record while captaining the famed British mercantile ship HMS Resolution. All right, guys, that wraps up part 3 of our coverage on the Hollow Earth.
So I was going to attribute the Oasis to Jeff, your friends that came over that were talking about, like, what was it, the missing history of like the Nordics and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the
that-
Bach saga.
Right. And then I looked it up, Bunger Hills rather, sorry. And it's not an oasis. I don't his quote unquote oasis is just a rocky plain free of ice. That's
Yep.
all it is.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, so not that, right? But that's the first thing I thought of was the Bach sagas.
It does have liquid water. I mean, it's not frozen over there in an area that should be frozen over.
And I mean, that's cool and all, but it's not an oasis. It's not like you'd expect an oasis, which is like a lush green, area in a desert. It's a desert in a ice field.
Yeah. Well, surely there's got to be areas that are like comfortable, even if they're under ice, right? There's got to be thermal venting or volcanic venting somewhere under an ice cavern. I mean,
Sure,
Antarctica is
yeah.
huge, right? It's like it's an entire continent. It's like the
Yeah.
biggest continent. It's huge, massive. So there's got to be areas like that where there's flowing water, probably even like hot springs, probably thousands of them. I mean, there's thousands of hot springs just in the United States, and you could probably fit multiple United States inside of Antarctica, right? So there's probably thousands of hot springs, hot running water. There probably are areas, and maybe in that area, even where you're talking about, Bunger Hill or whatever it is, maybe somewhere near there, underground, there is some place, and that's what they were actually referring to.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. I was hoping to find some really cool stuff on exploration. Unfortunately, the only books that were about Arctic and Antarctic exploration were super old, and I could not get a copy of it. Like the ones that I reference in this presentation and the ones referenced in the books that I was reading, I couldn't get copies of them. They're out of print. They're old. The ones that are on eBay are like $500, $600, $1,000. And I'm just not going to pay that. So, this episode, I think out of the 4 is probably the least impressive, mostly just because of Admiral Byrd and his diary. Not that it's his fault. Somebody else claims to have found his diary, so can't really blame it on Admiral Byrd. But I'm not a big fan.
I like Ray Palmer's theory of extraterrestrials, and that leads credence to Jeff, what he's always saying, that extra terra, it's not outside of the Earth, it's on the Earth, but extra land masses that aren't discovered, whether it's inside the Earth or on the other side of the ice wall or whatever it is. I don't know if he actually believes that, but that's what he says. Like that's the theory, right? Extraterrestrials aren't from off planet, they're from here, but just in unknown locations. And so I
Right.
like how he developed this idea. I don't know whether that was in 1957 or 1976 or in the middle of the two when he was doing this Flying Saucers magazine, which good run, by the way. That's pretty rad. But but that's what his theory was. And it's like, you know, right now here in 2024, it's completely different. Everyone's like, oh gosh, they're coming from space. And it's like, no, you know?
So Ray Palmer is a very questionable character when it comes to Fortean studies. He has been known to embellish a lot of things, just throwing it out there. He's not a very reputable guy. You know what I'm saying? Not I mean, you know what I mean.
I know what you're saying.
Although I know Jeff likes wordplay, I don't. I don't put a lot of weight into extraterrestrial and extraterra.
It's not necessary. You know, I don't. I think. I don't know. It's interesting, right? It could. I don't really believe in coincidences, right? So it could be a coincidence, but there's something there at least. I think, if you ask me. Now, maybe it's just a psyop. Maybe one is a psyop for the other, right? Because in my opinion, flat Earth is a psyop. Even though I've argued in favor of flat Earth, and I've spent a lot of my time in my life like trying to understand the model, I still think it's a psyop. So maybe that concept of extraterrestrials is just a psyop, but it's interesting.
I don't know, man. I I am 100% in belief that it is much higher of a probability that extraterrestrials are from the Earth, right? I think that it's a much higher probability that they're from the Earth compared to space. I just don't like the wordplay.
Sure.
I hear a lot of people, you hear that argument a lot: extraterrestrial, extra terra, extra. Well,
Well,
I mean,
you
what
gotta
do
you gotta
what do
figure
they
though
what do
that's
they
just
call it in
a
other
word.
languages, though?
That's just a word we've assigned to them.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that's what they are.
No. I get
I'm
that. I get that.
I'm
I
under
get that. It's the
100% of the belief that they're interdimensional beings, like
right,
angels and
but
demons, things like that.
the conspiracy side of
Right.
things is that the government plays. They do this word game with you, right? They
Right.
tell you what it is, but then they give it an alternate definition.
Sure.
So like extraterrestrials mean aliens from outer space, right? But they say extraterrestrials because they want to just throw it in your face that they're actually from extra Earth.
Right.
But everyone on the planet believes that they're from space.
Yeah.
And there's multiple examples of this too. I don't know. I don't really buy the wordplay thing.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even a real word. I was just seeing if there was actually a word, extraterra, and it's not even an actual word, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's probably just part of the psyop, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make it a coincidence still. Could still be a synchronicity. Still psyop.
Yeah. And just to be clear, it's not that this is the wordplay. The extraterrestrial is not the one that I don't necessarily believe in. It's the wordplay thing in general that they
Oh, you
apply
just don't
to
like it. So
multiple.
if I told you that like spelling was called spelling because we're casting spells with our language, right?
Correct.
You don't like
Correct.
that kind
Yep.
of thing. I feel
Nope.
you. No problem.
That exactly. And I know you probably have a book of these things too.
I
But
don't. I know a few, and it's always interesting to me to think about, but I know some people who do. Maybe I'll try to get them on the show and see if they can change your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be cool.
Yeah,
Be dope.
That'd be cool. Yeah, I just don't put a lot of weight into it, man.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
Something
it's
like the weekends, right? The weekends is the weekends, and the weekdays keep you in the weekdays.
Mm.
That's like a hippie thing.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah. That one I like.
We should all
I
go
don't know, man.
barefoot. That's the way it is.
I feel like all those wordplay examples are just tailored to the English language. It's just not,
sure.
Yeah.
you know. All right. You guys got anything else?
I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
I think that Admiral Byrd's full of crap. I mean,
Well, I don't think Admiral Byrd is. I think it's whoever found the diary, quote unquote.
all right. Well, whoever found the diary is full of crap.
Mm-hmm.
Either that, or he's just in on the psyop, or he's taking orders to say what he's supposed to say, or write what he's supposed to write in this diary. What, you know what I mean? Like, it's all just part of the theater that he knows what's up, or at least he's taking orders from someone who knows what's up.
Which, by the way, one of the people attached to not necessarily finding the diary, but publishing the diary was Ray Palmer. Just throwing that out there too.
See, and they know that Admiral Byrd is he's a lifer. You know what I mean? He's a real company man. You know what I'm saying? So he'll, whatever he's got to do. Hey man, we're gonna put you involved in this thing, and you're gonna be like a public psyop till the day you die, bro.
He's
like
Joe Navy.
Yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
He's there. Yeah.
Is gosh, what was I gonna ask? Guess it's not important.
Okay. Sure? We can wait a minute.
I'll think about it for a minute. Hold on. Give me a second.
I can just edit it out. You're good, man.
Yeah.
I gotta try to go live on Facebook one day and try to do that downloading of the audio. I can't figure it out. Because if we can just go live on Facebook, then I'm just gonna do that from now on.
It might not be a thing. I don't know, bro. I know you could do it on some platforms. So I know I've seen it as an option. I wouldn't bet money on it that's on Facebook, I'll tell you that.
I don't know. I can't think of it. It doesn't matter.
All right. Well, without further ado, we'll go ahead and close up this episode. All right. Well, travelers, that is it. That is part 3 of the Infinite Red Holes coverage on Hollow Earth exploration. Personally, I think this is the weakest of the 4. Next week, we dive into life and flying saucers. We're going to look at flying saucers from a different point of view. And we're going to see life, as in the title, Life and Flying Saucers. That's it. Until next time, travelers. We'll see you right here in the fork in the path of the Infinite Rabbit Hole. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.